Tonight, somewhere on this planet, someone is having the most important moment of their life, and you are not in it. Not really. Maybe you passed them once on a sidewalk years ago. Maybe you stood behind them in a line you've already forgotten. Or maybe your paths never crossed at all. And still their story is unfolding right now, the most vivid scene they will ever live, while you sit here, breathing slowly, listening to a voice in the dark. It's a strange thing to consider. Out of the billions of stories happening at this exact moment, only one of them has you at the center. Every other story has you somewhere on the edge, or not at all. Statistically, almost everywhere, you are the background character. That's a quiet thought to sit with. Welcome. If these slow, wandering explorations help your mind soften towards sleep, you might consider staying a while and returning when the nights feel long. Tonight, we're going to walk gently into a question that hides beneath most of our days. A question philosophers have circled, scientists have measured from odd angles, and ordinary people have felt without naming. The question of whether you, the experiencer of this very moment, might also be an extra in countless other lives unfolding around you. And how, if at all, you could ever tell. There's no alarm in this, only curiosity. Let your shoulders lower. Let the room grow a little quieter. We have time. Imagine walking into a room with a small stain on your shirt. A coffee mark, perhaps, or something you noticed only on the way over. You feel certain that everyone has seen it. You sense their glances, their quiet judgments, the soft weight of attention pressing against your skin. And yet when you ask later, almost no one remembers. Most never noticed at all. This small, ordinary moment hides something remarkable about how the human mind constructs its sense of importance. Psychologists have a name for it. They call it the spotlight effect, the deeply rooted tendency to overestimate how much others observe us. The mind, it seems, carries an invisible stage light it cannot switch off. Wherever you go, that light follows. Wherever you sit, that light hovers. And from inside the glow, it feels impossible that anyone else could be looking away. But they are. Almost always they are. Inside their own minds, they carry the same private spotlight. They are rehearsing what they said in a meeting hours ago. They are wondering if their hair looks strange tonight. They are remembering a comment from years past that still stings in some quiet corner of memory. Their attention is not aimed at your stain, your hesitation, your shoes. Their attention is aimed inward, at the small private theatre playing only for them. So the spotlight you feel is real, but it is yours. It illuminates only you, and only from inside. There is a softer cousin to this idea, sometimes called naive realism. It's the gentle assumption that the world appears to others much as it appears to us, that what we see clearly, others must see too. That if something feels obvious to us, it surely feels obvious to them. And from that quiet assumption grows the belief that we are, in some sense, the natural reference point of every room we enter. Yet step back, even for a moment, and the illusion thins. Each person you pass tonight is the center of their own quiet universe. Each is the protagonist of a story you will never read. Each carries their own spotlight, their own stain they're sure everyone noticed, their own moment they cannot stop replaying. And here lies the first gentle wow. The feeling of being watched, judged, observed, central, is not necessarily evidence that you are central. It may simply be evidence that you are conscious, that you are a mind looking outward from inside itself, mistaking the architecture of your own awareness for the architecture of the world. Some have said this is one of the deepest illusions the brain produces, not because it lies, but because it cannot do otherwise. The mind has no choice but to render reality from a single point of view. That point of view is always you. And so, naturally, everything begins to seem arranged around it. But arranged is not the same as central. A lamp at the center of your vision is not at the center of the room. A voice closest to your ear is not the loudest voice in the world. The spotlight that follows you was never aimed by anyone outside. It was lit quietly and continuously from within. And this is where the suspicion begins to deepen. If the feeling of being the main character is partly an artifact of perception, then perhaps the role you imagine yourself playing in other people's stories is also an artifact, a shape your mind invents to make sense of a world it can only ever see from one window. We will sit with that thought for a while, gently, without forcing it open. There's a particular sensation that arrives sometimes late at night, when the room is dim and the day has settled into memory. A quiet inner narration begins. You revisit something you said. You imagine what tomorrow might bring. You feel the shape of your life as a kind of story, with you walking through it, chapter by chapter. That narration is older than language, older than literature, older than any story you've ever heard. It is built into the very architecture of the brain. Neuroscientists studying the resting mind have noticed something curious. When you stop focusing on the outside world, when you stop solving puzzles or watching screens or paying close attention to anything in particular, a specific network of brain regions becomes more active. It hums in the background, weaving thoughts about yourself, your past, your relationships, your imagined futures. They've come to call it the default mode network, the brain's quiet stage where the autobiographical self performs. This network does something extraordinary and easy to overlook. It takes the scattered fragments of memory, of feeling, of half-noticed details from your day, and stitches them into a continuous story, a story with a main character, a story with motivations, regrets, hopes, themes, a story that feels seamless, even though it is being assembled, moment by moment, from incomplete pieces. You do not remember your life. You construct it, gently, again and again, every time you reflect. This is one of the strangest realizations modern brain science has offered. The protagonist you feel yourself to be is not stored somewhere as a single intact identity. Instead, the protagonist is rebuilt continuously from fragments, like a mosaic that reforms each time you glance at it. Today's version of you remembers slightly different things than yesterday's. Next year's version will edit, soften, sharpen, or quietly forget pieces you currently feel are essential. And yet, through all this editing, the sense of being a single continuous hero never seems to waver. The story holds, even as the pages shift beneath it. Some researchers suggest that this construction is part of why humans survive so well. A coherent self can plan. A coherent self can imagine consequences, build relationships, hold promises across years. Without the inner narrator, the world would arrive as a flood of disconnected sensations, with no one to gather them. But here is the gentle paradox. The same network that gives you the feeling of being a hero also tends to overestimate your importance in the wider story. It is the same hum, the same quiet stage. When it wanders toward you. When it imagines you at the center. When it rehearses your lines. This may be why the feeling of being a main character is so persistent. Not because the universe arranged it, not because some cosmic narrator chose you, but because the mind, by design, is a story-making organ, and the story it tells most often is its own. It might be unsettling at first, the idea that your sense of heroism is, in part, a neurological default setting. Yet there is something tender about it too. The brain doesn't insist you're the hero because you're vain. It insists because, without that thread, you might forget how to be yourself at all. So you carry the narrator with you. You always have. And it whispers faithfully that you matter. Perhaps it whispers a little too confidently. Perhaps. But for now, let it hum in the background, as it always has, while we keep walking. Picture a slow train moving through the soft blue hours of evening. You're seated near a window, the city sliding past in long, lazy strokes of light. Across from you sits a stranger, maybe an older man with tired eyes, maybe a young woman reading something you can't quite see. They glance up once briefly, and then return to whatever quiet world they were inhabiting before you arrived. For most of human history, that small glance was the only thing two passing lives shared. Yet inside that stranger's mind, in that very second, a universe is unfolding. They are remembering an argument from last week. They are wondering if they left the stove on. They are carrying a private grief or a private joy that no one on this train will ever know. They have a childhood bedroom they could describe in detail, a song they sang badly at a wedding, a scar with a story, a specific way the rain smells in the town where they grew up. You see only their hands resting on a bag. They see only your reflection in the dark window. But beneath those surfaces, two entire inner worlds are moving past each other, brushing close, then drifting on. There's a word that began circulating quietly in recent years for the strange feeling of recognizing this. The word is Sonder. It describes the sudden awareness that each random passerby is the protagonist of a life as vivid, as complex, as inwardly real as your own. It's an ordinary word for an extraordinary realization. Most of the time, the mind does not bother with Sonder. It treats other people as figures, props, obstacles, helpers, faces in a crowd. This is not cruelty, it's economy. The brain cannot fully simulate the inner life of every person it encounters. If it tried, the noise would be unbearable, so it simplifies. It flattens, it turns the strangers around you into background. Cognitive scientists sometimes describe this as a limit of what's called theory of mind, the ability to imagine that others have minds different from your own. You have this ability, everyone does to some degree, but it has a ceiling. You can only hold so many imagined inner worlds at once. So most of the people in your day appear to you the way background characters appear in a film. Present, moving, but not deeply rendered. And here's the quiet inversion. To the stranger on the train, you are the background character. You are the figure near the window, the flicker of a face, a passing detail in a story they will not remember by morning. Two protagonists sitting across from each other, each silently demoting the other to scenery. It's almost funny, in a soft way. Almost humbling. Some have wondered whether Sonder is a feeling we should cultivate more often, not as a burden, but as a kind of gentle widening. Each time it arrives, the world becomes slightly larger, the streets become populated, not by extras, but by experiencers. Each car holds an inner monologue. Each lit window contains a small, intricate universe. You don't have to hold all of it. You couldn't, even if you tried. But every now and then, on a slow train, in a still evening, when the light is the color of memory, it can be a quiet kind of marvel to notice. The seat across from you is not empty of mystery. It is just as full as your own. And whatever story you imagine yourself in, there are countless others passing through, unseen, unsuspected, complete. There's a memory you've returned to many times. It might be a childhood afternoon, the shape of a kitchen, the voice of someone who is no longer in your life. You believe you remember it clearly. You can almost feel the temperature of the air, the texture of a wooden chair, the angle of a window's light. But here is something strange. Each time you remember it, you are not pulling the memory out of storage like a film from a shelf. You are rebuilding it. And every rebuilding leaves quiet fingerprints behind. Researchers studying memory have come to suspect that recollection is closer to reconstruction than retrieval. When you recall an event, the brain reassembles it from scattered traces. Once reassembled, it must be put back, in a process sometimes called reconsolidation. And in that brief window of being out and being returned, the memory becomes slightly editable, influenced by your current mood, shaded by what you've learnt since, subtly shaped by who you are today. The version you store back is never quite the version you took out. This is one of the gentlest disorientations in modern science. Your past is not a fixed object. It is a living document, revised quietly each time you visit it, which means the story you tell yourself about your life, the one that gives you the sense of being a coherent protagonist, has been rewritten countless times. Old chapters smoothed, sharp edges softened, certain moments highlighted into significance, others fading into mist. You did not choose all of these edits consciously. Some came from emotional weather, some came from later experiences that recolored earlier ones, some came from conversations with others who remembered the same event differently and quietly altered your version without permission. In a sense, the protagonist of your life story is being co-edited by your present self, by the people around you, by the cultural narratives you absorb. by the mood of the room when you last reflected on it. There's something quietly humbling about this. The hero of your story is being written not by a single author, but by a kind of slow committee, and the committee is mostly invisible. Some scientists have shown that even a leading question, gently asked, can reshape what people are sure they remember. A vivid detail can be inserted by suggestion. A confident assertion from another person can shift your recollection in directions you do not notice. Memory is not stubborn. It is hospitable. It welcomes guests and sometimes lets them rearrange the furniture. If this feels unsettling, it does not have to, because there is another side to it. If your story is continuously edited, then the heaviness of its older chapters may not be permanent. The memories that ache can soften with time, not just because pain fades, but because the brain quietly rewrites them, adding meaning, perspective, context, distance. The protagonist you were in those harder seasons is not exactly the protagonist you carry now. Some of that suffering has been gently revised, but the question we are walking around tonight returns. If your memories are being edited by experience, by others, by the slow drift of years, then how confident can you be that you are the main author of your own narrative at all? Perhaps the story is being shaped, in part, by forces and voices outside the small window of your awareness. Perhaps the role you believe you've been playing is not exactly the role being written. We will not solve this. Only sit with it, like an old photograph slowly changing in our hands. Try, gently, to remember every face you saw today, not the people you spoke with, the others, the man who held a door, the woman in the parking lot, the child laughing somewhere behind you, the cashier whose eyes you barely met. Most of them are already gone, not because they meant nothing, but because the mind does not have room to keep them. The brain, for all its astonishing reach, runs on a tight attentional budget. Some researchers estimate that the human mind can comfortably hold meaningful, ongoing relationships with somewhere around 150 people. This rough figure is sometimes called Dunbar's number, after the anthropologist who noticed the pattern across species and cultures. It seems to reflect the size of the social world our cognition evolved to manage. 150. That is roughly the population of a small village, a school class through the years, a guest list of weddings and funerals. Within that circle, you can track moods, intentions, histories, names, the small intricate weather of relationships. Beyond that circle, the resolution drops. Faces blur, names slip, lives become silhouettes. And yet, in a single year, you may pass through hundreds of thousands of people, in crowded stations, in airports, in packed streets, in quiet shops on quiet afternoons. Almost all of them will remain unknown to you, and almost all of them will forget you just as completely. Sit with that softly for a moment. It does not mean those passings were empty. A kind glance from a stranger has lifted many people through harder days than they ever revealed. A small act of patience in a long line has rearranged someone's afternoon. A brief overheard laugh has stayed in someone's memory longer than you would believe. But most of these moments leave no record. They drift into a vast, unreadable archive of forgotten faces, both yours and theirs. There is a particular quietness in realizing this. Each day you appear briefly in many people's lives. You walk into the corner of their visual field. You become, for half a second, part of the texture of their world, and then you are gone, in their eyes, forever. You did not even notice it happening. This is what it might mean to be an extra, not a tragic figure, not a wasted life, just a presence whose role in someone else's story was simply to exist, briefly, in their peripheral vision, and from inside their story, that's all you were ever asked to be. There is a strange tenderness in this idea. Most of the time, we worry about being remembered, being significant, being noted in some grand register. Yet most of the work of being alive happens far away from any such record. Most of your goodness, your kindness, your steadiness dissolves into the day like sugar into tea, invisible, unmeasured, real. Some have wondered whether this forgetting is a kind of mercy. If you remembered every face, every glance, every passing stranger, the mind would be cluttered beyond function. The fact that they fade is not a failure of attention. It is the price of being able to attend to anything at all. So tonight, as you settle into stillness, consider gently how many people have already forgotten you today, and how many you have already forgotten. Not as a sadness, as an invitation to wonder. Because if so many ordinary lives, including yours, can leave such a quiet trace, then perhaps the meaning of a life is not stored only in those who remember it. Now turn the lens the other way. Somewhere out there tonight, someone is remembering you. Not vividly, not as a central figure, but as a small detail in a moment that mattered to them more than you ever knew. Maybe you said something brief, almost careless, that lodged in their mind like a soft splinter for years. Maybe you smiled at them once when they were close to breaking, and your smile became part of how they survived that week. Maybe you stood beside them in a hallway during news that changed their life, and now you are forever stitched into the edge of that memory, even though you remember nothing about that day. To you, that day was background. To them, that day was foreground. And you, without knowing it, were inside the frame. Researchers studying social cognition often note that humans dramatically underestimate how much of an impression they leave on others. People consistently believe they were less noticed, less appreciated, less remembered than they actually were. The same mind that overestimates being watched in moments of self-consciousness somehow underestimates being remembered in moments of genuine connection. It is a strange asymmetry. In the brightly lit rooms of our embarrassments, we feel exposed. In the quiet corridors of our kindnesses, we feel invisible. Yet the truth is often reversed. The mistakes you replayed have faded from others' minds. The small graces you barely remember offering have stayed in theirs. This is the first hint of a quiet inversion in our story. You may be a background character in many people's lives, yes, but sometimes being in the background still matters. Sometimes the supporting role carries weight the protagonist never sees. Think of someone who shaped you, a teacher perhaps, a neighbor, a co-worker you barely stayed in touch with, someone whose presence quietly nudged your trajectory. Now consider that they may not realize what they did. They may have moved on, forgotten the conversations you replay. To them, you might be a name they can almost place. To you, they remain a kind of co-author of who you became. This means that you too are likely a co-author of someone else's life. Without consent, without ceremony, without ever having been told. Some have called this the unseen weight of presence. The way human lives lean into each other in ways neither party fully tracks. You are at the center of your own story, perhaps, but you are also, simultaneously, a recurring guest, a passing mentor, a quiet villain, a fleeting muse, in stories you will never read. That alone undoes the simple line between protagonist and NPC. You are not only one or the other, you are both constantly, in ways that shift depending on whose eyes you imagine yourself through. The role is not fixed, it is layered. It is a slow rotation of perspectives, each one true within its own frame. Some quiet part of you may already have sensed this. It might have arrived in a small moment, when you saw an old acquaintance years later, and they remembered you with a tenderness that surprised you, or when someone thanked you for a gesture you had completely forgotten. In those moments, the architecture of the main character illusion cracks a little, and you glimpse the wider web. You were never only the hero. You were never only the extra. You were always, at every moment, woven into a great unseen choreography of lives. Tonight, we will let that woven feeling stay with us as we move towards smaller, stranger signals from the edges of the frame. There's a peculiar feeling that visits many people somewhere in their 30s, or 40s, or any age really, when the calendar begins to blur. The week feels like the week before. The month dissolves into the month before that. A year passes and you wonder where it went. Time, which once felt enormous in childhood, has begun to fold quietly into itself. Researchers studying time perception have offered a gentle explanation. The mind appears to compress repeated experiences. When a day is mostly familiar, mostly predictable, mostly built from routines you've walked through countless times before, the brain barely encodes it as a separate memory. It groups it, like a librarian filing nearly identical pages into a single thin folder. This is sometimes described through ideas like habituation or chunking, the way the mind packages the predictable into small, manageable bundles so it can attend to what matters. The unfamiliar, by contrast, stretches. A trip to a new place can feel longer in memory than 3 uneventful months at home. A first job's first week can seem larger than entire later years at the same desk. It is not that you lived less in the routine days. It is that your mind, with quiet efficiency, recorded less of them. And here is where the suspicion of being a background character softens into a question worth holding. If you watch the structure of your days carefully, you may notice how scripted much of it has become. The same route to a familiar place, the same words exchanged with the same people in the same sequence, the same minor decisions made in the same micro moments. Even your spontaneous choices, on closer look, often follow patterns you did not consciously design. Background characters in stories are often defined by their predictability. They appear when expected. They say what they're expected to say. They leave when the scene requires them to leave. When you notice that much of your week is built from similar repetitions, it can feel, just for a moment, as though you've glimpsed something honest. The texture of your days is not always the texture of free invention. Sometimes it is the texture of a part being played, almost by reflex. But here, gently, the picture begins to twist, because the same repetition that makes life feel scripted is also, paradoxically, what allows depth to grow. A musician practicing the same scale thousands of times eventually finds music inside it. A gardener returning to the same soil every spring eventually understands the land in ways no traveler can. A parent reading the same bedtime story for the 100th time may notice something new in the words that night, something the first 99 readings did not reveal. The repetition is not always evidence of being an extra. It can also be the very ground on which a deep, particular life is built. Still, there are days when routine carries a thinner feeling, when you suspect you are simply going through motions written somewhere outside you, by culture, by expectation, by the inertia of who you've been until now. Some have called this the quiet drift, the way lives sometimes move along grooves so familiar that the experience of choosing fades into the experience of repeating. You don't need to fight that drift right now. We are only noticing it together, because the moment you notice the repetition, something interesting happens. A small distance opens between you and your routine, and in that small distance, the supporting actor begins to look up, gently, at the lights, and wonder who exactly arranged them. You've probably had this experience. You're sitting in a meeting, or at a dinner table, or in a group of friends, and a conversation begins to shape itself in a particular direction. Opinions are exchanged, a decision is forming. You sense where it's heading, you wait for the right moment to speak. You almost do. You half open your mouth, and then someone else says the thing you were going to say, or the topic shifts, or the moment passes, and the decision is made without your voice ever entering the room. Later, you replay it. Why didn't you speak? Why did the conversation feel like it was happening to you, rather than with you? This is a small, quiet experience, but it carries one of the strangest signals about narrative position in everyday life. Group dynamics researchers have noticed that conversations, especially in groups of more than 3, often follow currents that no single participant controls. Decisions emerge through patterns of dominance, agreement, hesitation, timing. Some voices carry more weight. Some are listened to more attentively, some quietly recede, and often no one is consciously choosing this. The current shapes itself. In larger groups, an effect sometimes called the diffusion of responsibility appears. When many people are present, individual agency softens. Each person assumes someone else will act, speak, decide, intervene. The result is a strange kind of distributed silence, where everyone is waiting for someone else to take the floor. In moments like these, the line between participant and witness blurs. You are there, you are part of the scene, but you are not exactly the engine of it. Some have wondered if this is what it feels like to be a supporting character in someone else's narrative. The illusion of choice without the substance, the presence without the steering. Yet here the picture rotates again, because in those same conversations, you have probably also experienced the opposite. Times when a single quiet word from you shifted the entire direction, a small comment that someone took home and thought about for weeks, a look you gave that made someone reconsider their position, a silence you held that mattered more than any speech. Influence in conversation is almost never proportional to volume. The loudest voice is not always the decisive one. The longest speech is not always the most remembered. Sometimes the briefest, gentlest contribution becomes the seed around which everything else later organizes. You may not know which of your contributions did that, nor will the others. The structure of influence is largely invisible to those inside it, so it can feel, on one hand, as though conversations move without you, and it can also be true, on the other hand, that you have moved conversations without anyone, including yourself, noticing. The peripheral role and the pivotal role coexist within the same person, within the same evening, within the same exchange. Background characters in scripted fiction often have no real power over the plot, but background figures in real life carry small, real, unpredictable weight. A waiter who lingers too long at the wrong table, a taxi driver whose late arrival reroutes a decision, a friend who once said casually the very sentence that would shape another's career. We rarely know which of our small acts have moved someone else's story, just as we rarely know which of others' small acts have moved ours. Tonight, as we sit with this, there is no need to find your right speech, your missed moment, your perfect line. The current of the conversation, of life itself, has carried more meaning through you than you have ever been able to track, and that, in its own strange way, is a quiet form of importance. Imagine sitting alone with your phone late one evening. You scroll, half absent, half curious, and the next video that appears feels uncannily right, or an ad surfaces for something you only vaguely thought about earlier, or a song begins playing that seems to know exactly the mood you didn't fully recognize you were in. For a brief second, you feel almost seen, then almost watched, then almost predicted. Behind that uncanny feeling sits one of the strangest mirrors humans have ever built. Algorithms that quietly track patterns of behavior, click, pause, replay, scroll length, time of day, and slowly, painstakingly build a model of you. Not a soul-deep model, not an inner self, but a behavioral one. A statistical sketch of which sentences you'd likely finish, which products you'd likely buy, which emotions you're likely to seek out in the next 10 minutes. Some researchers, drawing from behavioral economics and predictive modeling, have shown how remarkably forecastable many human choices are at scale. Not because people are simple, but because patterns are persistent. Habits are deep, preferences cluster. Decisions, once you've made many of them, leave a kind of statistical signature. And here is a quiet, slightly unsettling thought. If a vast portion of your daily choices can be anticipated by a system that has never spoken to you, never seen your face, never understood your inner monologue, then how much of what you call your taste, your personality, your style, your you, is genuinely free invention, and how much is the predictable output of a process that began long before you were aware of it? Some philosophers have softened the sharpness of this question by reframing it. Predictability, they suggest, does not necessarily mean unfreedom. A river is predictable in many ways, yet it is not less a river. A song you love is predictable on the second listen, yet it is not less moving. Patterns can be deep without being shackles. Still, when the algorithm completes your sentence before you do, when it suggests the next show you'd pick before you knew you wanted it, when it cues the exact song for your exact evening, it can feel like meeting a version of yourself that already knew your lines, and lines belong to scripts. There's a particular kind of vertigo in realizing that vast networks of code may know certain things about your behavior more accurately than you know yourself. Not your meaning, not your soul, but your patterns. Yet there is also, woven through this, a strange opportunity for gentle freedom. Because the moment you notice the script, you have, in a small way, stepped outside it. The algorithm cannot predict the moment you decide. gently to surprise it, to choose a quieter video, to put the phone down, to take an unplanned walk, to follow a thought no recommendation could have placed in your mind. In those small unscripted moments, the supporting actor pauses, looks at the camera, and chooses something that wasn't in the day's draft. Some have wondered if this is what it means to remain human in an age of forecastable selves, not to be unpredictable for its own sake, not to rebel theatrically, but to notice, occasionally, the soft shape of the script you've been handed, and to add, here and there, a small line of your own. The algorithms will adjust. They always do. But somewhere inside the steady predictability of your days, the unrepeatable moment still happens. And in those moments, no model in the world can fully know you. Only you can. There's a particular kind of dream many people have experienced at least once. You're standing in a dream, but you're also somehow above it, watching yourself move through the scene. You see your own body from outside, the way a camera might. You feel both inside the dream and quietly removed from it. It's a small wrinkle in the usual experience of being a self. Sleep researchers have noticed how often dreams shift between first-person and third-person perspectives. Sometimes you are the main actor, looking out through your own eyes. Sometimes you are the observer of a scene in which you also happen to appear. The camera, so to speak, drifts. It does not always stay anchored to you. During REM sleep, the stage of vivid dreaming, the brain becomes intensely active, particularly in regions involved in emotion, memory, and self-modeling. Yet certain other regions, the ones tied to ordinary logical control, are quieter. In that strange chemistry, the usual rules of selfhood loosen. The dreamer's sometimes you, sometimes someone watching you, sometimes simply a presence with no clear location. Many people have woken from such dreams and felt mildly disoriented. The sense of being a single, fixed observer behind their own eyes is so habitual in waking life that any departure from it feels uncanny. Yet for those few minutes of dreaming, the boundary thinned. You were both inside the scene and standing apart from it. You are both the protagonist and the audience. This raises a quiet question. If your mind can on its own generate experiences in which you are not always the central viewpoint, then the central viewpoint you cling to in waking life might be less fixed than it feels. It might be more like a default setting than an absolute truth. Researchers studying what is sometimes called the observer self have explored this in waking experience too. Many traditions of contemplative practice describe a state in which one becomes aware of being aware. You sit quietly, follow your breath, and at some point attention turns gently inward, and a small voice notices itself noticing. There is the thought, and there is the awareness of the thought. Two layers, briefly distinct. You don't have to seek that state to recognize it. It arrives sometimes on its own. In a moment of stillness, you catch yourself watching your own reactions, watching your own narration, watching your own life unfolding as though from a slight distance. In those moments, the storyteller and the story momentarily separate. This is one of the strangest soft hints that you may not be a fixed protagonist after all, because if you can step outside your own story even briefly, then perhaps you were never entirely inside it. Perhaps the protagonist you usually identify with is one layer of you, and there is another layer, quieter, that simply observes. That quieter layer feels less like a hero and more like a witness. It does not particularly need to win. It does not particularly need to be central. It is content to watch, with gentle interest, as the scenes pass. Some have wondered if this is part of what dreams quietly rehearse, not just the events of the day, not just the emotions of the week, but the very flexibility of viewpoint itself. The fact that you can be in your story without being trapped as the lead. Tonight, as you drift along the edge of sleep, the camera in your own awareness may already be loosening. The voice narrating your day is growing softer, and somewhere behind it, the observer remains, gentle, patient, present, neither star nor extra, simply here. Try, for a moment, to remember the last time someone watched you do something simple. Maybe you were cooking and a child sat at the table. Maybe you were driving while a friend was beside you in silence. Maybe you were writing in a cafe while strangers moved around you. Now notice this. Something in how you moved, how you breathed, how you held yourself was different because they were there. Even if you didn't try to perform, even if no one said a word, being observed changes the observed. Quietly, reliably, almost universally. Researchers in social psychology have long studied this through ideas like social facilitation. Performance on simple, well-practiced tasks often improves when someone is watching. Performance on harder, less familiar tasks often gets worse. The mere presence of another person tilts the inner weather. The body responds even before the mind has decided whether to care. This is one of the gentlest pieces of evidence that other people are not just background to your story. Their attention, even silent, even passive, alters what unfolds, which means that when you stand in someone else's scene, even quietly, even doing nothing in particular, your presence is doing something. Their breath is shaped a little by yours. Their movements adjust slightly to your nearness. Their thoughts include you, somewhere in the periphery, whether they acknowledge it or not. You are never entirely passive in another's story, even when you think you are. This is a strange and tender realization. Background characters in scripted fiction often have no real influence on the plot. They are simply present, painted into the wall of the scene, but in lived experience, even the most peripheral observer subtly bends what is happening. A stranger watching from a bench can change how a couple speaks to each other. A quiet child in the room can soften the tone of an argument. A single attentive listener can transform what a speaker is willing to share. The witness is not neutral. The witness is part of the field. Physicists, in entirely different territory, have spoken of how observation itself can change a system. The phrase is often borrowed loosely, even misleadingly, in everyday talk. The technical version, of course, refers to delicate experiments at scales far removed from daily life. We don't need to stretch it. The simple, ordinary truth is enough. In human worlds, being watched and watching others both reshape the moment. If you have ever felt that you were merely an observer in your own life, this might gently shift the texture of that feeling. Observers are not weightless. Witnesses are not absent. The act of being present is itself a kind of quiet authorship. Some have wondered whether this is part of why solitude can sometimes feel so different from loneliness. In genuine solitude, you witness yourself, and that witnessing alone can be enough to give shape to the hours. In loneliness, there is often a sense that no one is witnessing, that the life is unfolding into a silence that does not register it. The same room, the same body, two very different inner climates. You have witnessed more lives than you can recount. People you stood near, people you served, people you taught, perhaps without meaning to. People whose stories you do not even know, but whose moments you happen to be in. To them, your presence was a quiet shaping force, and tonight, somewhere others are witnessing you, in their thoughts, in their memories, in the soft reruns of moments that mattered to them and not to you. The background, it turns out, is full of unseen authorship. Sometimes the world arranges itself in ways that feel almost narrative. You think of an old friend, and they call that same afternoon. You read about a place you've never been, and 3 more references appear within the week. You hesitate before walking through a door, and the hesitation somehow becomes the difference between 2 very different days. In stories, we'd call these moments plot. In life, we call them coincidence. And yet, something in the mind whispers that they feel scripted. That whisper is worth listening to gently, because it reveals something quietly profound about how the brain organizes experience. Cognitive scientists have studied the way humans search for patterns. The technical name for the tendency to perceive meaningful connections in random or unrelated events is apophenia. It is not a flaw, it is a feature. The same pattern-seeking instinct that finds shapes in clouds, faces in burnt toast, melodies in static, also finds meaningful threads in the chaos of daily life. In small doses, this instinct is essential. It allows you to recognize friends from a distance, to predict outcomes from incomplete signs, to learn that certain sequences in nature tend to repeat. Without it, you'd be lost in noise. With it, you sometimes see designs where none exist. So when life seems to arrange itself like a story, the most honest answer might be that life often does arrange itself in patterns. and the mind is exquisitely tuned to notice them. Coincidences are not magical. They are mathematical, given enough days and enough events, but they are also not nothing. They are real perceptions, and they often carry real emotional weight. Here is the gentle wow. A coincidence that feels meaningful can shape a life even if it has no objective design behind it. A chance meeting that you decide to treat as fate can become the beginning of a marriage. A book that fell off a shelf onto your foot, which you decide to read, can change a career. A delayed train that you decide was the universe slowing you down can give you the breath you needed to make a calmer choice. The pattern may have been random. The meaning was not. Some have wondered whether much of human life unfolds in this strange space, where the events themselves are products of vast and tangled chance, but where the meaning we weave around them is what actually shapes our trajectories. Statisticians sometimes call these long sequences random walks, paths in which each step is unrelated to the last. Yet the overall shape, viewed from above, can look surprisingly story-like. Random walks can wander into beautiful patterns. They can also wander into nothing. But to a mind that lives inside the walk, the shape often feels chosen. So when you sense that your life sometimes plays out like a script, you are not necessarily wrong, and you are not necessarily right. You are sensing the place where statistical probability meets narrative perception, where chance encounters and meaning-hungry minds meet in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. In one sense, the coincidences mean nothing. In another, they mean what you make of them. Both can be true. If you are an NPC in someone else's story, then the coincidences you notice may simply be the natural overlap of many storylines unfolding in shared space. If you are the protagonist, then those overlaps may feel like plot. The events are the same, only the role from which you watch them differs, and perhaps that is the deepest hint of all. Not that life is scripted or unscripted, but that it is meaningfully shaped by which role you imagine yourself in. We carry that idea now, gently, into deeper philosophical waters. Step outside for a moment, in your imagination, into an ordinary city street at dusk. The lights are coming on, people are walking home, or out, or nowhere in particular. Cars whisper past, somewhere a door opens, somewhere a phone rings. The world hums with countless overlapping lives. Now do something strange. Try to hold all at once the awareness that each person walking past is, from the inside, the main character of their own existence. Every single one. It's almost impossible to keep that thought intact. The mind slips. The figures flatten back into background almost as soon as you try. This is what some philosophers have called the many protagonists problem. Reality contains an extraordinary number of conscious beings, each of whom experiences the world from a single central viewpoint. Each of them is, from their own perspective, the irreplaceable observer at the center of everything, and yet only one of those viewpoints can ever be inhabited by you. Behind this gentle puzzle stands one of the deepest mysteries science has ever circled, sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness. It is the question of why there is something it is like to be anyone at all, why there are these inner experiences, these felt qualities, these worlds from within accompanying the workings of brains. Researchers have made enormous progress understanding the mechanics of the brain. They can trace electrical signals, they can map regions tied to vision, memory, decision, they can predict with growing accuracy what someone is doing or even imagining from patterns of activity. And yet, the question of why any of that should feel like something to anyone, why it isn't all happening in a kind of dark silence, remains genuinely open. In other words, the protagonist of any inner story is itself a mystery science has not yet explained. If consciousness is so deeply mysterious within a single mind, then multiply that mystery by every conscious creature alive tonight, every person, every animal whose inner life we can only guess at, every newborn opening eyes for the first time, every elder watching the world fade with quiet acceptance. Each is, in their own internal sense, a center, many centers, many spotlights, Many private worlds. How can the universe contain so many centers at once? Some philosophers have suggested that the answer might be that the universe doesn't really have a center at all, that what each of us experiences is a viewpoint, not a position, a camera, not a king. Others have suggested that there may be deeper unities beneath the multiplicity that ordinary perception cannot reach. Still others have said the question itself may be beyond the kind of answer human minds are built to provide. We will not resolve any of this. We are only walking near it, gently. But here is the soft wow. If everyone is, from their own perspective, the protagonist, then perhaps protagonist is not really a metaphysical category. It is a perspectival one. It depends on which window you are looking through. Step into another's window, and suddenly you are the supporting figure. Step back into your own, and you are central again. Protagonist is not a fixed property of a soul. It is a position of perspective. This means that being an NPC in someone else's story does not threaten your status. Your status is always relative to the camera. From inside your own life, you remain the protagonist by definition. From inside theirs, you may be a brief shadow. Both are true. Neither is more real than the other, and perhaps the deepest reverence we can offer the world is to remember that every figure walking past tonight is a center of meaning we will never enter. That is enough wonder to sit with for a long time. There is an idea that has slipped into modern conversation over the past few decades, often half-jokingly, sometimes seriously. The idea that the reality we move through might be, in some sense, a simulation, a constructed environment running inside a vast computational system, hosted somewhere we cannot see, by beings we cannot identify. It sounds like science fiction, and in many ways it began there, but it has also been taken up as a careful philosophical thought experiment. Some thinkers have proposed it not as a claim about ultimate reality, but as a way of probing what we mean by reality at all. The reasoning often goes something like this. If civilizations can ever become advanced enough to simulate entire worlds with conscious-seeming inhabitants, and if many such civilizations might choose to run such simulations, then statistically the number of simulated minds could vastly outnumber the original ones, from which some have argued we might conclude that we are more likely to be among the simulated than among the originals. Other thinkers have pushed back, pointing out hidden assumptions, weak steps, leaps of logic. The argument remains contested, debated, unresolved. It is not a settled finding of science. It is one possible framework, among many, for thinking about the structure of existence. We hold it lightly tonight, as a thought experiment, not a creed. What is interesting for our quiet exploration is how the simulation idea connects to the feeling of being a background character. Because in any simulation we currently know how to build, in games, in models, in virtual worlds, there are protagonists and there are NPCs. There are figures who are guided by full inner experience and figures who are merely background routines. Both populate the same scene. Both appear, to the casual eye, similarly active. If reality were structured even loosely like that, then somewhere inside the system, some minds would be foregrounded, others backgrounded, some scripted in detail, others sketched broadly, some carrying rich inner experience, others perhaps carrying less, or carrying it differently. It is unsettling to consider, even briefly, and yet even philosophers sympathetic to such models often note something gentle. From the inside, the difference may be unobservable. A well-rendered background character would, in their own private experience, still feel like the protagonist of their world. The depth of their inner life would still feel real to them, because the felt sense of selfhood is part of the rendering itself. So even if such a model were somehow true, the experience of being you, the immediate aliveness of this moment, the warmth of your breath, the small sounds in the room, would remain genuine within its own frame. This is why even the most speculative thought experiments seldom undo the felt reality of being alive. They reframe it. They do not erase it. Some traditions of thought have long suggested that the deepest questions about whether the world is real or rendered may not be answerable by minds operating from within the world itself. There may be limits to what beings inside any system can ever know about the system from which they arise. These ideas leave room gently for mystery, for humility, and for the kind of openness that does not demand a final verdict. You do not need to decide whether reality is simulated or not, designed or not, originated by some unimaginable cause or not. You only need to notice that the question itself softens the certainty that you alone, exactly as you understand yourself, are the unquestioned center of everything. And in that softening, the quiet possibility of being a supporting role in some larger story becomes easier to consider without fear. It becomes one of many ways the universe might be wider than we yet imagine. There is a question philosophers have circled for as long as there has been philosophy. A question that returns whenever someone notices, with a small chill, how much of their life seems to have unfolded according to forces they did not choose. Are your choices yours, or are they outputs of a vast chain of causes, stretching back before you were born, running quietly through you tonight, and continuing long after you are gone? For some, the very feeling of being an NPC arises here. If every decision you've ever made was, in some sense, the product of prior conditions, your genes, your upbringing, the random fortunes of where and when you were born, the chemistry of your brain in a particular moment, then in what sense were you the author of those decisions? Perhaps, they whisper, you only seemed to choose. Perhaps the script was always running and you were only reading along. This is the territory of determinism, the idea that all events, including human choices, follow from prior states of the world according to lawful processes. But the picture is not so simple. Other thinkers, sometimes called libertarians in the philosophical sense, argue that human consciousness involves a genuine kind of openness, a capacity to introduce something not strictly determined by what came before. Still others, often called compatibilists, suggest that even if determinism is true in some deep sense, what we mean by free will, the experience of deliberation, the responsibility for action, the ownership of choice, can survive intact within it. In recent decades, neuroscience has added strange new wrinkles. Some experiments suggest that certain decisions can be predicted from brain activity moments before the person consciously feels themselves choosing. Other research, in the area sometimes called predictive processing, describes the brain as constantly generating expectations about the world, then quietly adjusting them based on incoming signals. In that view, even perception is partly a prediction, partly a script the brain writes before the moment fully arrives. These findings are real. They are also frequently overinterpreted. They don't by themselves prove that you are not free. They show that the experience of choice is more layered than common intuition assumes. Here is the gentle wow. The very feeling that you might be following a script may itself be one of the products of a brain that constantly drafts and revises its own behavior in advance. The sense of acting freely arrives a little after the action has begun. The sense of having decided arrives a little after the decision has formed. Selfhood, in some ways, is reported to you by you slightly after the fact. That is enough to dizzy anyone if held too tightly. Better to hold it lightly, because none of these models, on their own, settle the question. Each describes a layer. Each reveals a small angle. None is the whole. Some philosophers and contemplatives have suggested that real freedom may not be the freedom from causes, which may be impossible, but the freedom to attend to the unfolding of choice, to notice gently the small flicker before action, to remain present as the decision arrives, to accept what comes without grasping at the illusion of total control. That kind of freedom is closer to a quiet posture than a metaphysical claim. You may never fully know whether your life follows a script, partly writes itself, or is co-authored by forces and patterns far beyond your view. But you can notice the moment you are in. You can notice your breath. You can notice that some small part of you, right now, is choosing to listen rather than turn away. Whatever the deeper truth, that noticing is yours, and that may be enough. In physics, there is a phrase that has wandered far from its original home. The observer effect, in its technical sense, refers to delicate situations at extremely small scales, where the act of measuring a system can disturb it. The phrase has been borrowed, sometimes loosely and inaccurately, to suggest grand statements about consciousness shaping reality. We do not need to stretch it that far. The technical meaning belongs to physics, and we let it stay there, but there is a gentle, honest version of the idea that lives clearly in human experience. The simple, ordinary fact that being observed changes the observed. Not at the quantum level, at the human one. You have felt this. Imagine writing in a journal alone in a quiet room, and now imagine writing the same words knowing someone is reading over your shoulder. The words shift, the honesty shifts, the pace shifts. The very thoughts you allow yourself to think can shift. Or imagine eating in solitude the way you might naturally eat. Now imagine eating in a crowded restaurant where strangers can see you. The shape of your gestures changes, even slightly, the way you hold your fork, the pace of your bites, the angle of your shoulders. Researchers in social psychology have noted this kind of effect across many domains. Children play differently when they sense they are being watched by a parent. Workers behave differently when supervisors are present. People perform differently in mirrors than in unreflective rooms. The observer is part of the field of behavior, not separate from it. So in daily life, every time you enter a room, you alter what is happening in it. Subtly, quietly, often invisibly. The same is true of every other person around you. This means that the question of whether you are protagonist or background is, in a sense, the wrong shape. Because even as background, your mere presence is already an active force. There is a soft wow here. The longer you carry this realization, the more it can change how you understand your day. Every conversation you witness is partly shaped by your presence. Every queue you stand in, every elevator you share, every street you cross is altered in tiny ways by you being there. You can never fully step outside the scene. Just by being, you are part of what is unfolding. But here is the other side of it. When you imagine being watched, observed, judged, you sometimes shrink, perform, hide. The observer effect can become a quiet weight. People often live entire decades shaped by an invisible audience that exists more in their minds than in any real room. Some have wondered whether much of modern anxiety arises here. In a world saturated with cameras, screens, profiles, ratings, the felt sense of being watched has expanded beyond the actual amount of observation occurring. The inner audience has grown large, while the actual audience often remains tiny. This too is part of how the line between protagonist and supporting role gets distorted. If you live constantly as though watched, you behave like a performer in your own scenes. If you forget you are watched at all, you behave with more spontaneity. Both modes shape who you become. There is no perfect balance to be found, only an awareness that the eyes of others, real or imagined, are quietly weaving themselves into your motions, and your eyes are weaving into theirs. You are observer and observed at once, background and foreground at once, part of countless scenes whose direction you can sense only partially. Tonight, as you grow quieter, perhaps notice the strange comfort of being unwatched in the dark. The mirror falls away, the audience drifts off, and you are simply here, shaped, finally, by nothing but yourself. There's a particular kind of moment that happens at dinner tables, in long phone calls, on shared walks. Two people are present, two inner worlds are spinning, and somewhere in the conversation both worlds touch, briefly, in something resembling a shared scene. Yet from each side the scene looks subtly different. One person remembers it as the night they finally said the truth. The other remembers it as the night they finally listened. One remembers what was eaten, the other remembers what was felt. One leaves changed, the other leaves wondering whether anything important happened at all. The same moment. Two unrepeatable interiorities. Philosophers have long pondered this strange property of being among other minds. Sometimes they speak of intersubjectivity, the experience of two consciousnesses meeting, partially, across the gap that separates every inner life from every other. We can never enter each other's experience directly. We can only build bridges from words, gestures, expressions, silences. The bridges are wide enough for shared meaning to travel across, but not wide enough to let entire selves cross over. And yet, somehow two stories share one scene. Think about how rare and ordinary this is. Every conversation you have ever had has been a soft collision of two narratives, each with its own protagonist, each with its own backstory, each with its own private interpretation of what is happening. The scene you walked through together exists in two different memory archives, in two different emotional textures, in two different chapters of two different life stories. The same dinner is multiple dinners. The same argument is multiple arguments. The same first kiss is, in some quiet, almost mystical way, two different first kisses, even though it happened only once in shared space. This is one of the gentlest insights into the protagonist NPC question. If protagonist is a position of perspective, then in any shared scene, there are at least two protagonists, each viewing the other partially as supporting character. You are not always the lead in someone's story, but in the moment you share with them, both of you are central within your own frame, and both of you are peripheral within the other's. The roles overlap. They do not cancel each other. When you have lived through a difficult exchange with someone and felt unheard, perhaps you have already sensed this. They were inside their version, you were inside yours. The conversation looked entirely different from each angle. Neither of you was lying. Both of you were partially correct. The full scene existed only when both perspectives were laid side by side, like two transparencies that, when overlapped, finally show a complete picture, but no one ever fully overlaps them. This is part of why understanding others is such gentle, lifelong work. Even people we love most deeply remain partly unreachable. Not because we have failed them, because the structure of being a separate consciousness contains a small, irreducible distance. Some have wondered whether this is also where compassion truly begins. When you accept that the other person's version of the shared scene is as real to them as yours is to you. When you stop expecting them to confirm your protagonist status. When you allow them their own. In that allowance, the entire question of who is more central, who is more important, who is more lead, softens. You begin to see relationships less as competitions for narrative weight and more as overlapping orbits, two centers passing each other quietly, two stories momentarily aligned. If you are an NPC in someone else's story, you are also the lead in your own, and they, in yours, are both. As are you in theirs. Each scene contains two suns. We are simply unused to imagining a sky with more than one. If you wanted a quiet way to sense how your role in life has been arranged, you might begin not with grand questions, but with one of the smallest ones. Through the course of a normal day, how often do you originate, and how often do you respond? It is a simple question. It is harder to answer honestly than it first seems. Reacting feels indistinguishable from acting most of the time. The phone buzzes, you pick it up. A message arrives, you answer. A request comes in, you handle it. The schedule was already made, you follow it. The conversation began and you contributed when it turned to you. By evening, you have done dozens of things, yet how many of them were originated from somewhere inside you, and how many were simply the natural shape of incoming signals? Some neuroscientists studying goal pursuit have noted that the brain has different patterns when it is generating action from the inside than when it is reacting to external prompts. Internal initiation tends to involve quiet, deliberate processes, often arising from the same inner regions that maintain long-term identity. Responding tends to be quicker, faster, more automatic, shaped by the structure of the environment around you. Both are necessary. Without responsiveness, you would never function in the world. Without initiative, you would never shape it. Background characters in scripted fiction are typically defined by reaction. They appear when the plot calls them. They speak when prompted. They leave when the scene closes. Their actions follow the pulse of the protagonist's choices. If your days are mostly reactive, this is not in itself evidence of being an NPC. Modern life is structured in ways that demand responsiveness. Jobs, families, technologies, all funnel signals towards you that need answering. But if all of your days are reactive, if you cannot remember the last time you did something simply because it arose from inside you, then perhaps a gentle inquiry is worth holding. What did you originate this week? Not from obligation, not from response, not from someone else's prompt, but from yourself. It might have been a small thing, a walk no one suggested, a thought you decided to follow, a question you raised, a creative effort that began in your own quiet, a boundary you drew when no one asked you to. Initiative does not have to be loud. It does not have to be dramatic. The smallest seed of self-generated motion is enough to indicate that you are not only being moved through scenes, but also, occasionally, opening doors of your own. Here is the soft wow. The lives we admire most often turn out to be lives with a high ratio of quiet initiative, not loud achievement. People who, in small steady ways, originated more than they reacted, who occasionally surprised the day, who introduced something into their lives that nobody else suggested. Such initiative is rare not because people are weak, but because the world is loud. The signals are constant, the prompts are endless. There is always something to respond to. Originating becomes a kind of subtle resistance, a quiet decision to add to the world from inside you, rather than only being shaped by what comes from outside. You don't need to overhaul anything tonight. We are only noticing. If the test of initiative reveals that, more often than not, your day was shaped by responding, that is not a failure. It is simply information. It is the beginning of a more honest sense of your narrative weight. From here, even a small regular act of inner origination begins to tip the balance gently back toward authorship. Even a single chosen pause in the day can be enough to remind you, you are not only a reaction, you are also a source. There is a strange small measurement you can take of your own social position in the world. It rarely shows up in conversation, but it lives quietly in the background of every relationship. Across the course of a week, how often does someone you know cross your mind? Now imagine, gently, how often you cross theirs. These two numbers are almost never equal. In some relationships, you think about the other person far more than they think about you. In others, the reverse is true. You drift through their mind constantly while they barely appear in yours. Most relationships are not symmetrical. The attention each person gives the other is shaped by need, by warmth, by circumstance, by the small mysteries of human chemistry. Researchers studying social cognition have noticed something else, gentler still. Many people in conversation underestimate how much they were enjoyed by the others present. They walk away thinking they bored someone, or annoyed them, or were forgotten. In reality, the others often thought of them more warmly than they suspected. This pattern has been called the liking gap, the small chasm between how much we think people enjoyed us and how much they actually did. But there is also an opposite effect. We sometimes think people are thinking about us when they are not thinking about us at all. We replay our own moments in their imagined minds. We assume our small embarrassments live as long in their memory as they do in ours. They do not, so attention is layered with illusion in both directions. We misjudge how often we are remembered. We misjudge how often we are forgotten. The asymmetry is real, but the measurement of it is shaped by inner weather. Here is where the protagonist NPC question opens softly again. In someone else's story, you might appear briefly and then fade. They may not think of you for months or years, even though they once knew you well. From inside your own story, they might remain central, vivid, important. The attention you give them is not returned in equal proportion. This is not a tragedy. It is the architecture of human attention, limited bandwidth, limited memory, limited room. Even people who love you cannot think of you every moment, just as you cannot think of them every moment. But there is a quiet wow inside this asymmetry. Sometimes the imbalance reveals something honest about your role in their narrative. If someone consistently thinks of you only when they need something, you may be a supporting figure in their story, perhaps a recurring helper, perhaps a convenient extra. If someone reaches out without needing anything, simply to share a thought, an image, a small message, you are more central to their story than you may have assumed. Watch gently who reaches out simply to remember you exist. Notice who you reach out to in the same way. Those exchanges, however small, mark the unspoken architecture of who is more present in whose narrative. Some have wondered whether much of life is shaped by these silent measurements of attention, why some friendships fade while others deepen, why some loves last while others dissolve, why some figures become recurring characters in your life while others appear briefly and disappear. It is rarely loud, it is rarely declared, but the rhythm of who thinks of whom and how often draws the slow lines of belonging across the years. You cannot force someone to think of you more. You can notice who is already thinking of you often, and you can choose intentionally who you wish to keep present in your thoughts, regardless of return. In a world of asymmetries, that is one small place where you can still quietly author your role. If you trace the long arc of your life, certain patterns may begin to emerge, the same kinds of relationships repeating, with different people in the roles, the same kinds of jobs despite changes in title, the same kinds of arguments echoing across years, the same emotional weather appearing in different cities, different decades, different stages. It can feel, when noticed honestly, as though some part of you has been auditioning over and over for the same character. Different stages, different fellow actors, same script. Researchers studying behavioral patterns and attachment have long observed how deeply the past tends to shape present choices. Early relationships often set quiet templates for what feels familiar in love, in friendship, in conflict. Old roles, learned in family or childhood, can persist long after their original context has dissolved. People sometimes find themselves repeating, with new partners or new colleagues, dynamics they thought they had left behind. This is not because the universe is conspiring against you. It is because patterns, once installed, are remarkably persistent. The brain returns to known shapes, even when those shapes are uncomfortable, because familiarity often weighs more than ease. There is a strange resonance here with the question of being an NPC. A background character in fiction often has a fixed function. They appear repeatedly in similar moments. They say similar lines. They serve similar purposes. They do not grow into different roles across acts. They are defined by recurrence. If you notice yourself, again and again, in the same kind of conflict, the same kind of disappointment, the same kind of unspoken sacrifice, you may be inhabiting a recurring role in your own life. Sometimes the role was written by old experiences, sometimes by family scripts, sometimes by the simple comfort of repetition. Here, gently, is the soft wow. The recurrence itself is information. The patterns you don't quite escape are not punishments. They are signals. They show you with quiet patience the parts of yourself still operating on instructions written long ago. And the moment you notice a pattern, something subtle shifts. The unconscious recurrence becomes a conscious recognition. You begin to see that you are not stuck inside a script. You are simply, for the moment, the actor most willing to perform it. From that recognition, slow changes become possible. Not dramatic, not all at once, but gentle, layered shifts, where the role begins to be rewritten from inside. Some have wondered whether part of the experience of feeling like an NPC arises from the simple weight of unconscious recurrence. We sense the same patterns returning, we feel slightly less in charge of them. We start to suspect we are running on instructions we did not author, but the very fact that you can sense the patterns means part of you quietly is outside them. That part is the observer. That part is the writer who, until now, was simply tired. That part is the small, steady voice that, late at night, in stillness says, I have lived this before. Recognition is the beginning of authorship. You don't need to break every pattern tonight. Many patterns are gentle, useful, even comforting, but some you might wish to revise, in small ways, a different response to an old trigger, a pause where there used to be a reaction, a different ending to a familiar argument, even one you only have with yourself. These small revisions can change the role over time. The recurrence softens, new possibilities enter, a few of the rooms in your life begin to look different, even though their walls have not moved. The script is not erased. It is gently being co-written, finally, with you in the room as author rather than just performer. There are moments in life when, briefly, you are not there, not in the literal sense. Your body remains, your breath continues, your hands still hold whatever they were holding, but something else, the persistent sense of being a self, of being someone watching, narrating, judging, planning, momentarily quiets. You are absorbed, lost in something, drawn into a moment so completely that, for a while, there is no longer a you stepping back to comment on it. Many have known this state. A musician deeply inside a piece, a painter inside a canvas, a reader inside a paragraph, a swimmer inside the water, a parent inside the eyes of a small child, a walker inside an unfamiliar forest. Psychologists call certain versions of this experience flow, a state of complete immersion in an activity, where time itself seems to shift and where the constant background self-talk of the mind softens. In flow, the protagonist of your usual story seems to evaporate. You are no longer in your story. You are simply in the doing. There are deeper, rarer versions of this too. Some traditions of meditation describe states in which the felt sense of being a separate self can soften to a kind of openness. Researchers studying these states have explored what is sometimes called ego dissolution, a temporary loosening of the boundaries that usually divide the inner observer from the world it observes. People who have known such states often describe a profound sense of connection, peace, or simple presence. There is another kind of disappearance that is not pleasant. Sometimes, in stress or shock, the mind retreats into a feeling sometimes labeled depersonalization, a sense of being detached from one's own life, as if watching it from far away. This experience can be uncomfortable. It is the same architecture of the disappearing self, but arrived at through different doors. Three quite different experiences, one underlying truth. The persistent self can soften, the protagonist can fade, the narrator can grow quiet, and the world continues. Here is the gentle wow. The fact that you can disappear from your own story, even briefly, suggests that you were never fully equivalent to the protagonist you imagined yourself to be. There is something beneath that protagonist, something simpler, more spacious, that remains when the narration falls silent. Some have called it awareness itself. Some have called it presence. Some prefer no name at all. Whatever it is what stays when the character drifts off stage. This is why the question of being an NPC in someone else's story, while interesting, is perhaps not the deepest question. There is something underneath all the casting decisions, something that does not need to be hero or extra, central or peripheral, important or invisible. It simply notices. You have probably felt it without naming it. The quiet that visits when you stop trying to be anyone in particular, the simple presence that remains while the inner debate fades. In sleep, this softens further. As you drift toward rest, the self loosens. The narrator yawns. The protagonist begins to disappear, and what remains is not nothing. It is the deeper layer, the unstoried presence, the simple aliveness that does not need a script. Some traditions have suggested that this layer never really sleeps. The body sleeps, the personality sleeps, the story sleeps, but the simple knowing remains, gently humming beneath it all. You do not have to believe this to feel its echo tonight. Just notice, occasionally, when the noise softens and you are simply here, without the protagonist, without the extras, without the script. There you are, quieter than the story, older than the role, closer to whatever you are when no one is watching, including yourself. There's a particular humility that arrives when you realize how much of life is decided in rooms you will never enter. Conversations about you happen today that you will never know about. Decisions were made about you, in your absence, by people who imagined what you would say without asking. Opinions formed about you in passing, while you walked through your own afternoon unaware. This is true for everyone. It has always been true. It is part of what it means to live among other minds. Researchers in social cognition often note how deeply the human brain is built for inferring the inner states of others. People are constantly modeling each other, predicting reactions, imagining responses, rehearsing conversations that have not happened yet, or that may never happen at all. Much of social life unfolds in these silent simulations. Your friends imagine you when you are not present. Your colleagues construct versions of you in their planning. Your family members carry mental models of you that shape how they speak about you, how they include you, how they hold you. Strangers form quick impressions and then revise them silently. Old acquaintances think of you sometimes, in moments you cannot guess. You appear vividly in many rooms tonight. You will never see yourself there. It is one of the strangest aspects of being a person. The version of you that lives in other minds is, in many cases more active in shaping outcomes than the version of you that lives in your own. Here, the protagonist NPC question loosens further. If the real plot of your life is partly being decided in the silent inner monologues of others, then the storyline you tell yourself is necessarily incomplete. You are operating from your own central viewpoint, while around you dozens of other viewpoints are quietly considering, judging, supporting, opposing, ignoring, loving. The full script of your life would only be readable if you could enter every mind that touches yours. You cannot. No one can. So you live, always, with partial knowledge of your own role. It would be easy to find this unsettling. Many people do when they first notice it. The realization that others are thinking about us in ways we cannot access can stir self-consciousness, anxiety, or quiet paranoia, but there is another way to hold it. Most of the time, the silent conversations are gentler than you imagine. Most people do not have nearly the energy or attention to construct elaborate negative narratives about you. Their thoughts about you are brief, often kinder than your fears suggest, and very quickly replaced by their own concerns. The audience in your head is almost always larger and more critical than the audience that actually exists. Some researchers have shown how strongly people overestimate how much others ruminate on their flaws. The mental theatre you imagine, in which others rehearse your mistakes, is mostly empty. The other rooms in their minds are occupied by their own concerns, just as yours are. And yet, in those quieter mental rooms, some of them think of you with affection you do not suspect. Old teachers who remember a student, old friends who recall a kind gesture, family members who hold private warmth they never quite express. There is, in this hidden weather of attention, a strange consolation. You cannot control how you appear in other people's minds, but you have, by being yourself, already shaped countless inner versions of you that exist in inner rooms you cannot enter. Some of them are quite tender. You are far more widely held, by far more minds, in far more silent ways, than your daily awareness can register. That is enough wonder to soften, gently, the sharpness of being merely an NPC anywhere. If you have been listening for a while, you may notice something quiet beginning to settle inside you. A softening, a small release. The weight of being central may have started, on its own, to feel less essential. There is a particular freedom in suspecting you are not the main character. For most of life, the protagonist illusion comes with a hidden burden. The constant management of how things look, the endless rehearsals of how you sound, the slow accumulation of small concerns about being seen, judged, remembered, missed, the unspoken expectation that you should be doing something significant, that your story should be building towards something meaningful, that the chapters should be progressing. When you sense, gently, that you may be a supporting figure in many lives, including, in some quiet way, your own, much of that burden softens. Researchers studying humility and well-being have noticed something striking. People who develop a quieter sense of self, less attached to constantly being central, often report greater calm, deeper relationships, and a sense of meaning that does not depend on achievement. They are not less alive. They are less performing. This is not the humility of being made small. It is the humility of being released from the demand to be large. Here, gently, is a wow. Importance has often been mistaken for meaning. We have been taught, in various ways, that to matter is to be visible, to be central, to be in the spotlight of attention. Yet many of the lives we most respect on closer look were lived mostly in the background. Parents whose names are recorded nowhere but in their children's quiet adulthood. Teachers whose true gifts were given to students who barely remembered their names. Friends whose offhand kindness changed a life they never realized they had changed. Background lives are rarely empty lives. They may, in fact, be among the deepest. When you release the constant pressure to be the central figure of every scene, your attention naturally shifts outward. You begin to notice others more carefully. You begin to enjoy small, ordinary moments more fully. You begin to take less personally. The world widens, because you are no longer using all your bandwidth on managing yourself. Some have called this a quiet liberation, not a denial of self, but a softening of self-importance. The overthinking mind, especially, often quiets here. So much of overthinking is the protagonist's anxiety, the worry that the story is going wrong, the rehearsal of past lines, the planning of future ones. When the protagonist demand softens, the rehearsals slow. The mental theatre becomes less crowded. The night becomes less heavy. This does not mean you become passive. You can still act, you can still create, you can still love. But you act, create, and love from a slightly lower place, where the question of how this will appear, how this will be remembered, how this will compare, no longer drives every decision. The bowing of the protagonist illusion is a strange relief. You are still here. Your life is still meaningful. Your moments still matter. But they no longer need to be central to be real. Some traditions of thought have suggested that the deepest forms of presence arrive only when self-importance is gently set down. Not abandoned, not erased, simply not allowed to drive. You do not have to do this all at once. We are only noticing the possibility. Tonight, as the breath slows, allow the idea of being unimportant to sit beside you, not as a wound, but as a gift. The pressure to be central can release a little. The grip of being seen can loosen a little. And underneath it, the simple aliveness remains. You were never only important. You were always also free. Imagine, gently, a single afternoon many years ago. You were somewhere ordinary, a bus stop, a library, a hallway. You said something casual to a person you barely remember now, a short comment, a passing kindness, maybe even just a smile. Somewhere out there tonight, that person remembers it. Maybe they have remembered it many times. Maybe it shaped a small decision that shaped a larger one. Maybe it became one of the quiet anchors of who they later became. You do not know which moment. You do not know which person. You may never know. This is one of the strangest realities of human life. Cameo appearances often outlast the appearances of leading roles. Sociologists studying social networks have long noticed how influential brief connections can be. Strong ties, your closest relationships, give you depth, support, intimacy. But weaker ties, acquaintances, distant cousins, old co-workers, often play surprisingly large roles in shaping opportunities, perspectives, and turning points. A job offered through a friend of a friend, a book recommended by a chance acquaintance, a piece of advice from someone you only met twice. The cameos, it turns out, sometimes shape the plot more than the main cast. This is true on the giving side too. You have been a cameo in many lives. Some of those brief appearances mattered far more than you ever realized. A stranger you helped find an address, a co-worker you reassured in a single conversation, a small online comment that arrived on a difficult night, a book recommendation you barely remember making, an act of patience in a long line. Most of these are invisible to you now. They left no trace in your memory, but they may live, quietly, in the memories of others. Here is the soft wow. If you have ever wondered whether your life truly matters, this is one of the gentler answers. Mattering is not measured only by the lives you central cast in. It is also measured by the dozens, perhaps hundreds of times you stepped briefly into someone else's frame and left a small persistent imprint. Most of these imprints are unrecorded. None will appear on your resume. They will not be visible to your future self looking back. But they accumulated, quietly, into a long invisible echo of presence. You will never tally it. No one will. But it is real. There is a strange tenderness in considering this. Many of the kindnesses we cherish came from people who do not remember offering them. The teacher who said one sentence that changed our direction. The neighbor who looked at us with warmth on a hard day. The stranger who held a door we did not realize we needed held. They were extras in our stories briefly. And yet, in their brief appearance, they altered something. Some of them are gone now. Some of them never knew. Some of them, if you ever told them, would smile in confused surprise. The cameo lives ripple beyond what the actors imagine. This means that being secondary in others' stories is not a smaller kind of life. It is one of the actual ways that meaning travels through human existence. It is not the loud, central, branded life that touches the most lives. It is the quiet, unremarkable, generous presence repeated again and again across the years. You have likely already been such a presence to many. You may already be one tonight to someone who needed it. You may be one tomorrow without realizing. Cameos echo, even unscripted ones, even unremembered ones, especially the gentle ones. For most of recorded time, stories were told around the figure of a single hero, a central character, a protagonist whose journey carried the meaning. Yet some of the deepest stories quietly resist that structure. They follow a constellation of characters. They show how meaning emerges from many overlapping lives. They reveal that no single thread carries the whole. Some have wondered whether life itself, looked at from a wider angle, is more like an ensemble than a hero's tale. Researchers in network theory have explored how outcomes in complex systems often arise from interactions among many nodes, not from the actions of any single central one. A city is not what it is because of one person. A culture is not what it is because of one mind. A friendship is not what it is because of one half. The whole emerges from the weave. Collective cognition research has hinted at something similar. The thoughts that shape an era are rarely born in any single brain. They form across networks of minds in conversation, often without any one mind realizing they are participating in something larger. This is the ensemble reframe. In this view, the question of who is protagonist and who is supporting role begins to dissolve. The categories thin. What matters is not whether you are central or peripheral, but how richly you are woven into the unfolding around you. A single brushstroke is not less important than another in a painting. It is part of the painting. The painting only exists because of the relationships between strokes. Some are large, some are small, some are subtle, all contribute. The question of which stroke is the protagonist of the painting is, in some sense, a misunderstanding of how paintings work. Here is the gentle wow. If reality, especially human reality, is more like a painting than a movie, then everything we have been exploring about being an NPC begins to look different. You are not a background character competing for the central spot. You are a thread in a vast unfolding fabric. Some threads run for long stretches. Some appear briefly. Some are bright. Some are subtle. All a part of what the fabric is. This is the kind of meaning that does not require importance in the usual sense. It does not require being remembered, being central, being known. It requires only being woven in, and every life, by simply living, is woven in. You cannot unweave yourself. You cannot become irrelevant to the larger pattern. You can only be unaware of how you fit. The weaving continues regardless of your awareness of it. Some traditions have long described existence in similar terms, as an unfolding of countless small contributions, each indispensable in its own way, each unnoticeable in itself, but together composing something none of them could compose alone. In the ensemble reframe, the protagonist illusion finally relaxes, not because it is dismissed, but because it becomes one possible way of being, among many. Sometimes you take a central scene, sometimes you hold a quiet thread, sometimes you simply listen. All of these matter, all of these contribute. You don't have to know your role precisely. You only have to keep weaving. Tonight, as the world settles, consider gently the many other lives quietly weaving with yours. The neighbors, the strangers, the distant ones, the ones you'll never meet, each adding their small stroke, their small thread, their small line. Together, you compose something none of you could be alone, and the painting, slowly, beautifully, keeps becoming itself. There is a kind of quiet realization that sometimes arrives after a long stretch of feeling unimportant. The realization that, although you cannot make yourself the main character of every story, you can become a more thoughtful author of your own. It is a small thing. It can begin in small ways. Therapists working with narrative identity often note how powerfully people are shaped by the stories they tell about themselves. Not the events of their lives exactly, but the meanings woven around those events. Two people can experience similar hardships and emerge with very different stories. One narrates resilience, another narrates injury. The events were the same, The story was different. This is not denial. Genuine pain is real. Genuine loss is real. The stories we tell do not erase what happened, but they shape what happens next. If life has felt like a slow erosion of your sense of authorship, this is one quiet place to begin, not by claiming a grand new identity, not by rebranding yourself, but by attending with gentle honesty to the story you have been telling about yourself in silence. Many people, when they listen closely, are surprised by what they hear, a repeated narrative of being unseen, a subtle theme of always being behind, a quiet conviction that meaningful chapters happen to other people, a small recurring belief that one's own story is somehow less interesting, less central, less alive. These narratives are not deliberately chosen. They are inherited, learned, absorbed from countless small messages over many years. But once noticed, they can be gently questioned, not aggressively, not with the force of self-improvement, simply with curiosity. Is this story the only way to read these events? That single question opens a door. Here is the soft wow. You may not be able to change your circumstances quickly. You may not be able to choose your role in other people's lives, but you can, slowly, choose how you narrate your own. You can decide whether to read your years as a story of being overlooked, or as a story of quiet growth in places that did not require applause. You can decide whether to interpret your hardships as evidence of being secondary, or as the texture of a real life. This is not pretending. It is simply allowing different readings of the same true facts. Some have wondered whether this is part of what it means to grow up emotionally. The slow shift from being narrated by your past to becoming a more thoughtful narrator of it. It begins with small acts of conscious storytelling, naming accurately what is happening in you tonight, without exaggeration, without dismissal, choosing one small story to tell yourself differently. Not because the new story is more flattering, but because it is more spacious, allowing a sentence about your own life to be reframed gently. Not, I have wasted years, but perhaps, I have lived many years that I am still understanding. These are tiny acts. They feel almost too small to matter. Yet, across a lifetime they accumulate. The protagonist you cannot be in everyone else's story becomes, gradually, the gentle author of your own. This is not grandiose. It is intimate. It is private. It is enough. You are not writing a novel for an audience. You are writing the inner record of a real human life, with its true scenes, its true losses, its true small joys, its true quiet beauty, and you are choosing slowly the tone in which you tell it to yourself. That tone shapes the years to come more than you yet realize. There is a strange kind of immortality that nobody talks about much. It does not depend on being remembered. It does not depend on being famous. It does not depend on being central to anyone's biography. It is the quiet way that every life leaves echoes in the world that continue long after the life has ended. Researchers studying cultural memory have noted how patterns of speech, gesture, attitude, and value pass quietly between generations. A grandparent's small expression, half-conscious, settles into a parent. The parent passes it, slightly altered, to a child. The child carries it into their own life, sometimes without ever remembering its origin. 3 generations later, the original grandparent is mostly forgotten, but a small fragment of how they once smiled, or paused, or spoke is still alive in someone's body. You carry such fragments now, echoes of people you never met, habits inherited from ancestors whose names you do not know, subtle ways of moving in the world that came from lineages older than any photograph in your home. In some sense, you are a temporary host to a long, slow story whose chapters extend before and after you. Researchers exploring what is sometimes called epigenetic inheritance have begun gently suggesting that even the experiences of earlier generations may leave biological marks that influence later ones. This is a young, still developing area of science. Many findings are preliminary, the full picture is debated, but the underlying suggestion echoes something older traditions have long suspected. The lives that came before us shape us in ways we cannot fully see, and if that is so, then your life, your quiet, ordinary life, will continue to shape lives yet unborn, not because of any grand achievement, simply because of how you lived, because of how you spoke, because of how you treated those you loved, because of how you handled the days no one was watching. Here is the gentle wow. You may be an NPC in someone else's story tonight, but you may also be, without realizing, an ancestor in someone's future story, however distant, a small influence in a chain you cannot see the end of. The way you spoke to a child today may shape how that child speaks to their own children one day. The patience you offered a friend may ripple through them to someone who never meets you. The kindness you gave a stranger may travel through small invisible chains into rooms that have not yet been built. You will not be there to see, you may never be named, but the threads continue. This is one of the quietest comforts of being part of a long human story. The protagonist illusion fades and something gentler arrives. The sense of being a passing presence in a vast unfolding choreography, not the star, not the extra, simply a participant in something older than any single role. Some traditions have suggested that every human life is, in this sense, sacred in a way no audience can measure. Not because each life is famous, but because each life is part of an unfathomable continuity, the slow, patient handing down of being itself from generation to generation. The mystery of why there is such continuity, why there is something rather than nothing, why anything endures at all, is left wisely open. Many thinkers have circled these questions for millennia, and humility seems the only honest posture before them. You do not need to answer those questions tonight. You only need to notice that your life, whatever its visible shape, is already woven into something far larger than you can see. The story you are part of will outlive you, quietly, without ceremony, as it has done for everyone. That is enough significance to carry into sleep. Here, near the end of our slow walk, the picture has become softer. We began with the unsettling thought that you might be a background character in someone else's story. We have wandered through the architecture of the mind that insists you are central, through the quiet signals that suggest you are sometimes peripheral, through the philosophy of being secondary, through small inward tests of role and weight, and through the gentle reframings that release the protagonist demand. What remains is a kind of paradox that no longer feels like a problem. You are the protagonist of your own story. From inside your own life, you cannot be otherwise. The viewpoint is yours. The window is yours. The thoughts unfolding now are happening irreducibly from your vantage point, and yet you are a supporting character in countless other lives. A face on someone's bus, a guest in another's memory, a name half recalled by a former friend, an ancestor to people not yet born. Each of these positions is real. Each is true within its frame. The protagonist and the NPC are not opposites. They are perspectives that overlap inside the same person, in the same moment, depending on whose camera is held to the scene. Phenomenologists have long pointed out that consciousness is always perspectival. You can only ever experience the world from one vantage point at a time. From here, you are central. Step into another mind, and you are not. But you cannot step into another mind, not fully. So you live, always, with the unresolved doubleness of being everything and almost nothing, depending on which side of the lens is yours. This is not a contradiction to be solved. It is a quiet feature of being a finite mind among many finite minds. Each consciousness is its own private center. Each consciousness is its own periphery in countless others. The universe, if such a word still fits, is a vast overlapping of centers and peripheries, intersecting in the brief contact zones we call relationships, moments, encounters. In that vastness, your role shifts constantly. Lead in your morning, extra in someone's afternoon, witness in another's evening, ancestor in a future scene, stranger in 1,000 passings. You have already been all of these today, even if quietly. Tonight, you do not need to choose which one is the truest. They are all true. There is a strange comfort in that. For so long, the question of importance has been framed as a battle. Who matters more? Who matters most? Who is central? Who is peripheral? Yet held softly, the question dissolves. Importance is not a fixed property of beings. It is a relational shimmer, moving across lives, settling sometimes here, sometimes there. You can release the demand to be permanently important. You can release the fear of being permanently unimportant. Both are illusions of a single fixed camera. The actual camera moves, and from above, if anyone could see it all, the spectacle would be a quiet kind of beauty. Billions of small protagonists, each living their precious centrality, each unaware of how often they are peripheral, each contributing to the lives of others without full knowledge, each carrying their own version of the same story we have walked through tonight. A universe of overlapping tales. You are one of them. Always have been, always will be, and that, gently, is enough. There is a particular kind of relaxation that arrives when the demand to be central finally releases. You may have felt small versions of it before. The moment when you stopped trying to control a conversation and simply listened. The afternoon when you stopped trying to be impressive and simply enjoyed being known. The evening when you stopped narrating your day and simply experienced it. Each of those moments was a small foretaste of what it might feel like to settle, more lastingly, into a smaller role. Researchers exploring the nervous system have noted how the body responds when the inner protagonist quiets. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens. The parasympathetic system, often associated with rest and gentle restoration, becomes more active. The body softens because the mind has, for a moment, stopped insisting it must be the main character of every scene. The grip of being central is exhausting. The body, more honest than the mind, knows it. When you allow yourself to be, sometimes, simply present, without needing to lead, without needing to be remembered, without needing to be central, the body recognizes a kind of safety it had nearly forgotten. The nervous system reads the slowed pace as a signal that nothing urgent is required. The protective vigilance softens, the shoulders lower, the breath deepens further. This is not surrender. It is release. The smaller role is, in many ways, closer to the natural pace of the body than the protagonist role. Bodies were not built to be on stage all day. They were built to participate, to belong, to move within ensembles, not to constantly perform under the spotlight of imagined audiences. When the spotlight dims, the body remembers itself. Some have wondered whether much of modern restlessness arises from a culture that insists everyone must be the lead of their own visible story. The pressure to be central, in social spaces, in careers, in self-perception, leaves the body quietly tired. The smaller role is denied. The audience never disperses. The performance never ends. But tonight, in this darkness, the audience is gone. No one is watching tonight. No one is judging. No one is keeping score. There is only the slow pace of your breath, the quiet warmth of the room around you, the gentle sound of these words drifting past. You do not need to be central anywhere right now. You only need to be here. The smaller role, finally, is not smaller at all. It is simpler. It is closer to the body's home pace. It is what life feels like when no one is asked to perform. Notice, gently, how the body is already settling. The eyelids softer than they were, the shoulders perhaps a little lower, the breath slower, deeper, unforced. This is what comes when the demand to be central quietly releases. You do not have to do anything to earn it. You only have to allow it. The story can wait, the role can rest. The protagonist can step into the wings. You are here. The body is held. The night is wide and patient. There is nothing to do now, nothing to be. Only this slow, unhurried being. The comfort of the smaller role is large enough to hold you completely. There is a question that quietly hovers behind everything we have explored tonight. What is it exactly that experiences any of this? You can describe the brain. You can map its networks. You can trace its patterns. You can study its illusions, its biases, its astonishing capacities and quiet limits. Yet beneath all that science, the simple fact remains. Something is here, noticing. Something is awake to the words drifting past. Something is, gently, the listener. What that something is, no one fully knows. Across centuries, the most thoughtful minds have circled this mystery. Some have called it consciousness. Some have called it awareness. Some have called it soul. Some have left it unnamed, sensing that any name might shrink it. Many have suggested, with quiet humility, that human understanding may never reach the full answer from inside the very experience it is trying to understand. This is not a failure. It is a kind of sacred limit. Whether reality is a vast network of minds, a great unfolding pattern, a careful design by something we cannot conceive, a self-arising emergence of something we cannot trace, or something none of our words can describe, all of these remain open. Different traditions and different thinkers have offered different framings. None of them alone exhausts the mystery. You do not need to choose between them tonight. It is enough to notice that you are held within a mystery far larger than any single story about it. The mystery does not press against you. It does not demand. It does not threaten. It simply surrounds, the way the sky surrounds, without asking anything of you. Whatever you are, whatever your role tonight, whatever stories you appear in or do not appear in, you are inside this larger holding. You did not arrange to be here. You did not author the fact that you exist at all. Something gave rise to your existence, in ways too deep for casual claim. Some have found comfort in calling that something a creator. Some have found comfort in calling it nature. Some have found comfort in leaving it unnamed. The deepest forms of humility seem to allow for many possibilities without insisting on any. What is left after all the speculations is the simple, unanswerable fact of being. You are, quietly, improbably, tonight. Whether you are central or peripheral, scripted or free, lead or extra in countless tales, the mystery that allows you to be here at all is the same mystery that allows everyone else to be here too. In that shared mystery, the small distinctions of role soften. The questions of protagonist and NPC become small ripples on a wide, dark, patient sea. You do not need to know what holds you. You only need to notice that something does. The night is wide. The mystery is patient. Your part in it is real, whatever its shape. Let the questions stay open. Let the answers remain partial. Let the wonder rest beside you, unforced, undemanding. There is no final verdict required tonight, only this gentle being held. Now the night is wide, the room is soft, the voice you are listening to is beginning to slow. There is nothing more to figure out. The questions have been gently held, the thoughts have been allowed to drift, the protagonist has stepped quietly aside. The supporting characters have done their small, important work. The scene is dim now. You do not need to be anyone tonight. Not the lead, not the extra, not the witness, not even the listener. Just the breath, just the warmth, just the slow softening of the body into the bed. Notice gently how the edges of your awareness have grown smoother. The day has receded. The small worries have already begun to loosen. The stories you carry in waking life are folding themselves away for the night. There is no role here in the dark. No camera, no audience, no script to follow. Only this quiet. Let the shoulders soften. Let the jaw release. Let the hands rest where they are. Let the breath fall a little deeper, on its own. You are held by the night the way the night holds everyone. Without preference, without judgment, without asking anything in return. All the questions we walked through together can rest now. They will still be there tomorrow if you wish to return to them. They will still be there, patient, never demanding, but tonight you can put them down. You can put down the need to know whether you are protagonist or background. You can put down the need to be remembered. You can put down the worry about who is thinking of you or who is not. You can put down the inner audience entirely. There is no one to perform for in sleep. There is only the slow, ancient invitation of rest. Your breath knows how to slow. Your body knows how to soften. Your mind knows how to drift. They have done this thousands of times. They will do it again now, quietly, without your interference. You do not have to fall asleep. You do not have to try. You only have to be here, in the gentle dark, letting the body do what bodies do at the end of long days. Let this voice fade. Let these words become smaller and smaller. Let the sentences become softer than the night around them. Your role tonight is no role at all. You are not lead. You are not extra. You are not even the watcher. You are simply this slow breath in this dim room, in this kind night. Whatever happens in any story anywhere, in any mind, in any frame, none of it requires anything of you tonight. The story can keep itself. You can let it go. Drift gently now. The night will hold what needs holding. The mystery will hold what needs holding. Whatever you are, however you fit, whatever role you play tomorrow, none of it is asked of you now. Sleep, when it comes, will come on its own. Until then, just this, just here, just now, quiet, soft, held. Good night.